Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Converging Horizons podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Tan. Converging Horizons is a platform to bridge US and Chinese students and foster dialogue to help students discover shared values and build fresh perspectives together, empowering them to tackle global challenges by collaborating across borders. The US China relationship is built by people, and the misunderstandings that polarize and divide us, as people and as nations, can be transformed through intellectual and interpersonal exchange. We believe that the most powerful ideas emerge when young people listen to each other, challenge assumptions, and discover new common ground. The purpose of this podcast is to bring to life the dialogue that can promote mutual understanding between the two countries' youth, and to inspire a new generation to take these differences as a source of strength and creativity. Today, we're diving into a topic that's incredibly timely and important: the differences in the education systems of the United States and China, and how it shapes their future relationship on the world stage. We're starting with education because as globalization blurs borders, future workforces will increasingly require people from around the world to collaborate across cultures. And as the two leading nations, China and the US will be central to this process. The success of future connection, innovation, and diplomacy depends heavily on the teenagers currently shaped by the vastly different educational ecosystems today. So understanding these differences is essential, and both nations could benefit by embracing the strength of each other. Having grown up and gone to school in both countries, I'm personally very invested in this topic and bring real-life experience to it. I invited two guests here today to share their experiences and have an in-depth discussion with us. We all carry so many perceptions, so it's very valuable for us to actually get to hear their personal stories as a real-time primary source. So I'm joined by two very insightful guests today, students from each country, who will help us explore this complex dynamic. Welcome to both of you, Nate and Cherry. Could you please introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Nate Bomze. I'm a senior in San Francisco, California. I go to the Nueva School in San Mateo.
Thank you. What about you, Cherry?
Hello everyone, my name is Cherry Chu. I'm currently pursuing my master's degree in Fudan University, and I have received my education entirely in China, so I'm therefore very familiar with the Chinese education system. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Can we shake hands virtually? We have one hand from the east of the Pacific in California and one hand from the west of the Pacific in Shanghai. Yay. What a warm handshake. Okay. So first, I want to hear what are your perceptions or impressions about each other's education systems? So Nate, in your mind, what is education in China like?
I think my perception of Chinese education, certainly like primary and secondary education, is uh, regimented and sort of very methodical, and not necessarily for the worse, but much more of what I would consider to be American education circa like the 1950s or the 1960s. I think about the Gaokao and stuff like that as emblematic of a system that prioritizes external benchmarks of learning as opposed to, a variety of other sort of more intrinsic metrics.
Cherry, do you have a response to Nate's perception? And if it's not accurate, what's the real case in China?
I think what he said is quite accurate because what we are evaluated in our high school is just based on our scores, which is the external assessment. So I think it's quite accurate.
So there is the stereotype that Chinese students are all nerds and very nerdy.
And do I look like a nerd?
No, but you might be an exception. So, Cherry, do you have a response to what Nate just said? And if he's not accurate, can you tell us what's the real case in China right now?
Okay, I think actually, I think it's part true, and actually, I think there is not so many nerds in China now. It's a kind of stereotype because the majority of my classmates in my high school and my university are students that have a lot of interests, such as they love to play some sports games, or they have some musical instruments, or they like to go hiking. So I think it's a kind of old mindset. So we need to change this kind of stereotype.
Okay. Then can you give us an overview of what education in China is actually like, the whole
Yeah,
system?
yeah. I have always been educated in mainland China, so my understanding of the US education system is basically based on the secondhand information. Actually, I know about two main things. The first one is that the US does not have a single nationwide college entrance examination. And if students want to apply to universities, they should use their high school GPA to apply for it, and such as the standardized tests like SAT or ACT, which will place more greater emphasis on the continuous performance. The second one is that public education in the US is decentralized and state governments play a dominant role. So while the federal government has limited authority, mainly providing the guidance through legislation or the targeted funding, so this will result in significant variation in educational quality across states, each with its own characteristics. That's it.
Okay, great. Then, Nate, do you have comments on how accurate her perception was? And can
Yeah,
you
I mean, I
briefly
would
explain
say
the
I
US
think
system?
the decentralization is interesting because while it's certainly true that a lot of education, a lot of curriculum, like for example, textbooks, are largely determined by state committees and at the state level, there are still pretty strong forms of federal legislation. So, um, at the federal level, first is that big landmark education policy projects like No Child Left Behind under Bush or Obama's Every Student Succeeds Act are at the federal level and are legislating priorities through the Federal Department of Education. The other thing is that the federal government has education standards, the Common Core standards, which are technically not mandatory, but are used by the vast majority of states in the US. So the actual sort of terms of education, the content area is pretty standardized and pretty federalized. And I would also caveat that I have not gone to public school in the United States. So this is my, knowledge from my friends and from other sort of
Mm.
time I've spent learning about this. The other thing about decentralization, though, is that um, there's a lot of relevance at the local level, like even within states. School districts are much more important units, and I don't know if there's a sort of comparable hierarchy in China, but really, school districts are the most important unit of education policy, and so a school district is normally anywhere from 1 to 5 high schools. It's normally about the size of a county, and school districts are typically where much of the day-to-day education policy gets handled.
Well, actually, I have an interesting question. Since you have mentioned the school district, I'm wondering whether it can influence the housing prices in this school district if this district has very high educational quality.
Yes, very deeply, and it's certainly a positive feedback loop because um, on average, about 48%, if I recall correctly, of a school district's funding comes from property taxes, which means that and property taxes are proportional to the value of the house, which means that the nicer the houses are, uh, i.e., the more expensive the houses are, the more that school district gets funded. And so nicer schools are in richer areas, which means that wealthier people move to those areas in order to get access to those nicer schools. And so it becomes cyclical. And so a lot of educational reform over the last couple decades has been about sort of cutting that line, right? So making it so that property tax funding is more evenly distributed. Like all the property tax goes into a bucket and then comes out evenly to schools, or even in a more progressive way. Because as it currently stands, that revenue is extremely, extremely regressive because it means that the people who have the best ability to pay get access to by far the best public education.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for sharing. So now let's move into the personal experiences. Cherry, let's start with you. How would you describe your experience in China's education system? And how did your education shape your outlook on life? Such as did it place more value on collective achievement or personal success?
Sure. During my education journey, I attended the prestigious schools since my elementary school. I think my early educational experience has taught me that effort should be rewarded, at least alongside the educational pathway. This principle has always proven to be true. I believe that at present, the value system within China's education system still prioritizes collective interest above all else.
Great. What about you, Nate? Can you walk us through your experience in school? Like what was
Yeah,
expected
so
of you and how did that shape your view of your future?
so I've gone to Nueva since I was 4 years old. It's a pre-K through 12 school, which is pretty rare in the US. Um, and the one exception to that is that I spent first grade we were living in Vienna, Austria. And so I went to the American International School there, which was a really interesting experience. But broadly speaking, Nueva is regarded as it's a very, very small private school. My class, my graduating class will be about 110 kids, and which is roughly in line with most private schools in the US, but much, much, much smaller than most public schools. And it is one of these schools, especially for younger grades, that began the movement towards a progressive education and a big focus on. I've had social emotional learning classes since I was 5 years old. Um, Big focus on that, big focus, or much less focus, certainly de-emphasizing tests, standardized tests. The only real standardized tests that we ever got were like state and federal government mandated tests. But we didn't have pop quizzes or anything like that. And so I have been fortunate to have an education that is much better than what most Americans are able to have access to. But it's certainly prepared me very well to be able to pursue a lot of what I'm interested in. I think academic choice is another really important thing. I don't know at all what that's like in China, but as a senior this year again, and this is largely a result of the school that I go to, but I've had the ability to choose literally every single one of my classes. So at my high school, every year, every semester, no two students have the exact same schedule. Everyone does, slightly different things. And again, that's certainly something that even within the United States, am pretty unique to have had that experience, but it's been very powerful for me.
Wow. And can you tell us a little bit about your expectations for college? Like how is higher education like in the US?
Yeah, higher education in the US is a really interesting system. So living in California, uh, I and all Californians have access to not just the University of California system, which is arguably the best public university system in the world, but also a community college system that enables extremely easy transfer to those flagship UCs. So typical uh, cost for a good college in the United States, whether it's an Ivy League or Stanford or MIT or even a state school that's a state that you are not in, right? So the University of Michigan or the University of Virginia for me ranges between 50 and $80,000 a year, call it. Going to a state school, an in-state state school, so for me, any of the University of California's or any of the universities of California is about $15,000 a year. Going to a community college is functionally free. Um, there's community colleges all over. What's so nice about California is that if you go to community college for a year or two, you're functionally guaranteed to be able to transfer to almost any UC, which means you could get rejected from every college you applied to as a Californian. Go to, for me, it would be CCSF, the Community College or the City College of San Francisco. And in a year or two, I would be almost guaranteed to be able to transfer to UC Berkeley or UCLA, and my diploma at the end of my, undergrad career would just say UC Berkeley or UCLA. Um, that being said, that cost is prohibitive to the vast, vast, vast majority of people. So most people, to the extent that they have the ability to go to four-year college at all, instead of just not going to college or going to trade school, uh, have to either go to, a state school, a community college, or take on pretty severe uh, student loan debt. And the converse to that is that even though the sticker price of Stanford is something like $80,000 a year, the average person pays closer to 25 or 30,000 because there is a huge amount of financial aid to those schools. But it's still a pretty significant price if you think about the fact that the median household in the United States makes only around $110,000 a year.
I see. Thank you for sharing. That's actually very interesting. So, for Cherry, is that anything you relate to in China? How are the costs of college in China?
The cost of college in China is quite lower than in the US because in my bachelor's degree, I just spent about 6,000 RMB per year to get go to school. So it's quite low relative to our family income.
Great. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. What is something that you liked the most and you didn't like the most about your school experience?
For me, it was definitely, I loved the academic choice that I got. And I loved being in an environment where we weren't just pushed by standardized tests and sort of those extrinsic benchmarks, and were able to dive deep in what was interesting to us and believe in a good future coming from that, right? And there's a lot of people that get sucked into the mindset of I have to do this and this and take these in this class to get into a good college. And I don't know if this is the same in China, but the truth of the system is, or at least as I've experienced it, is that if you do what you love to do and you show yourself as an interesting person, the system will work for you. Um, I think what I like the least. I think that that freedom only works for people who want to learn. And the United States has certainly been on a swinging pendulum in terms of how much we emphasize those external benchmarks and sort of trusting students to learn at their own pace and learn at their own volition. What I mentioned earlier, the No Child Left Behind, George Bush in the early 2000s was essentially forced teachers to teach to the test, which students' test performances got better. Students' mental health also got worse, right? More people were dropping out. And so there was this interesting balance to be had of how much do we care about, students showing that they know how to do math, they know how to read versus students who feel like they're getting a good education. It's a hard balance to draw.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Freedom doesn't always mean a good outcome. So, what about you, Cherry? What is something you liked and don't like?
Yeah, I think every coin has both sides, and I think what I like in my high school or middle school is that actually uh, I'm a very hardworking person, so I like the subjects that the school taught me before. But the good thing is that I can have a very deep understanding of the knowledge. We deep dive into the knowledge, and I think they have laid a very solid foundation for us. But the bad thing is that we need to have better scores by using a lot of memorization or extensive practice. So it's very time consuming. I don't have time to do some extra curriculum activities. And so I think sometimes it's a waste of time to do too many exercises on the same thing.
And does that memorization largely work? Like, certainly in the United States, when people are cramming for tests, they might not remember it the week after or the month after. Like, you know, obviously it was a couple of years ago, but do you feel like you remembered more from when you were cramming or from when you were sort of studying at your own pace?
Yeah, I think actually I don't need to memorize some knowledge too many times. I just need to look through the book several times and I will got the main idea of the knowledge. And actually, I don't think we need to spend too many times on the memorization. So I actually I hate it. I hate the rote cramming study style. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. So, speaking of cramming and all of that, I'd like to hear more about the familial pressures and also societal expectations surrounding education. So Nate, how is the culture around academic competition and success in the US, and how does that affect you personally?
It's pretty severe. I think it's the biggest outcome is certainly around college, is certainly around getting into what are perceived as good colleges. And there's a lot of stress that a lot of people feel. Again, personally, I've been fortunate to grow up, in a family that's always pushed me to sort of go to wherever I feel fulfilled and not feel pressure to get into a sort of quote unquote good school. Um, but I have plenty of friends, plenty of people I know for whom that is not at all the case. And it's pretty brutal to watch them try and force themselves into a mold that really isn't who they are. Um, I think, Cherry, your point about the freedom to do extracurriculars and things like that is certainly really wonderful if you are able to and choose to spend time doing the things that you love. For me, that's debate. I love debate. I've done it since I was in seventh grade. Um, but part of that academic pressure pushes people towards extracurriculars that they think will look good for college. And those tend not to be things that I think people enjoy much more than, cramming for a test. But they think that it'll be something that looks good. So that pressure definitely exists and it definitely governs people's behavior.
Right, thank you. Then in China, there is the public perception that academic competition is extremely intense, with the high stakes exam you mentioned determining a student's entire future. And it's common to believe that widespread burnout is very common because academic performance represents not just the individual, but the whole family. So, how accurate do you think that is, Cherry? And if it is accurate, how are you impacted as someone experiencing this?
Yeah, I think it's largely accurate. Chinese students' pressure is evident. From a very young age, we're told that attending a good university can secure you a good job in the future and a high social status. So education is tightly linked to a good future position in the society. So as a result, most students compete intensively along the Gaokao track. While reforms like the double reduction policy and alternative admission pathways have emerged, most students still rely heavily on the exam performance. Actually, the essence of the system has not changed. It just adds more chances for us to take the exams, increasing students' tolerance for the failures, but instead of reducing our pressure.
Sorry, what exactly are those reforms you talked about, the double reduction policy and I don't remember the name of the other one.
Yeah, it's called the double reduction policy. It has been put forward for about several years to reduce the homework loads and uh, give more freedom to children to play or do some extracurricular activities outside schools and leave as least as little as homework for the young students to do in the house. So I think it's a good policy for the students in China, but actually it doesn't reduce our pressure because the tests are not reduced because we still need to you pass the 中考 or the 高考 exam to enter the high school or the universities. So our academic burden is not uh, reduced. Yeah.
So how many, like for you in a typical night when you were in high school, about how long would you spend on homework and studying?
Yeah, actually, we have a evening study session in our high school. It's about 3.5 hours, and we will leave school at about 10 o'clock. But after that, that doesn't mean that you can go to sleep. I still need to do some extra homework for us at about until about 12 o'clock to get a good score and enter a top university. it's just in Shanghai because I'm a Shanghainese. I'm in a very high level of economic level. Yeah, so I think China's Shanghai's educate competition in the Gaokao is less competitive in other disadvantaged regions in China. So the other regions Gaokao competition is much more severe than in Shanghai.
Wow, that's a very interesting phenomenon. The Americans are getting so stressed out from trying to do more extracurriculars, while the Chinese need government policy so they can have time to do it. So it seems like you guys both have pressures. Then how do you guys cope with pressure usually? Nate, you can go first.
I mean, for me, I think I, again, like I said, I've been fortunate enough and I think always done a good job of spending my time on things that I really enjoy doing. And so for me, the to the extent that I faced pressure, which I have, it's mostly been internal. And I think I've been able to sort of give myself a sense of perspective of not just the work that I've done, but also that, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to voice this properly. That I have the ability to zoom out. And I think, say this test isn't going to be the end all be all, right? If we think about standardized tests, my understanding of the Gaokao is that it's one sitting, right? You take the test once, that's it. I have friends who took the SAT 6 times, right? I have friends that took the SAT 6 times, decided they didn't like their score, and then took the ACT 4 or 5 times. I have friends that did all that and then decided they still didn't like their score and then applied test optional. And so there are far less make or break moments, which I think is a good thing. Like I think it's a good thing that if you're sick the night before your test, that doesn't screw up your college application. Like for us, college applications come down to test scores and grades, but also extracurriculars and essays and Stanford I think had 9 supplemental essays in addition to our main essay, teacher recommendations, like all of that gets factored in. And so I think in terms of the end goal of pressure being college admissions, it's much easier to say no one thing is going to matter. This is a sum of everything I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 or 10 years.
That's clearly not very possible for the Chinese students in terms of mindset. So how do you cope with pressure then, Cherry?
Yeah, actually, I usually go to the KTV to sing for a while or just sing whenever I'm free and to relax myself. I think people can do something that they are interested in to escape from our heavy academic burden.
Great. Okay, so now let's move into equality and challenges. So something I'm curious about is your views on educational equality and higher education access in each of your countries. I know you already touched a little bit on this. So both systems attempt at promoting equal opportunity, but is this really achievable given your experience? And does education widen or close the gap between privileged and marginalized students?
I think education uplifts everybody in the United States, but it certainly uplifts privileged students more. And I think that that's pretty inevitable. I think that uh, even if you didn't have private schools, wealthy students could, get easier access to tutoring or things like that, let alone the benefits, the well-proven benefits of like if your parents read to you at night when you were a kid, that is a extremely significant, statistically significant indicator of how well you'll do in the future. And so, of course, better off students do better. But I think that fundamentally, most places do a pretty darn good job of, especially in the last couple decades, of making education as accessible as possible. Now the a lot of the Ivy League, Stanford, places like that are moving towards no loan financial aid. right? So removing student loan debt as an obstacle for people. Then again, 60 years ago, that wasn't an obstacle, right? 60 years ago, college tuition compared to income was the same as as what you're describing in China now. Um, so it's sort of a problem that we have artificially created and that now we're doing a solid job of solving, but certainly very different from the world of 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years ago.
I see. Then, Cherry, how is equality in China? Like,
Yeah, I think our education system promises a very score-based equality, saying that everyone is equal when faced with grades. It has provided us with an opportunity to the social mobility. I still remember the slogans in my high school classroom, like 1 point can beat 1,000 people. Although it sounds brutal, it reflected the countless families' faith in efforts being rewarded.
thank you. Then, Nate, what do you think are the biggest challenges for your country's education system ahead?
I think politicization poses a pretty big threat,
Mm.
and I would imagine this is also true in China. I think the politicization of and polarization that affects the US in general is felt, especially as a result of how decentralized the education system is. We were talking about at the start that, when school districts can choose what books get taught, right? When states can choose literally which version of history they buy in a textbook, there is a pretty significant discrepancy. Then again, I think that if it was federalized, we'd see the same thing we would with every other form of federal policy, which is that it just shifts back and forth every 4 years. So, I don't think that would necessarily be a better world, but I do think that politicization is pretty pretty important, and I think that it poses a pretty big risk to our ability to maintain a shared truth and a sort of shared understanding of the world.
Is politicization also an issue in China? Cherry.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue in China because we have a united government in Beijing. So the textbooks that we use across all regions in China are the same. So although we have different Gaokao tests based on the regions you are in, but we use the same textbooks to prepare for the task. So it's not quite a big issue for us.
I see. Then what do you think are the biggest challenges for China's education system?
Yeah, yeah. And Chinese education system promotes fairness in principle, but our regional resource gaps still remain stuck. While the wealthy areas like Shanghai will offer diverse quality education, the underdeveloped regions still rely heavily on the time investment, which is a disparity I witnessed between Shanghai and other regions before. However, the influence of the internet and AI are narrowing these gaps via the low-cost resources. So I think the future challenge may be to reduce students' pressure while maintaining our educational quality.
I think part of what's jarring, like that inequality exists in the US, but it's not just provincial, it is school by school. Like it's, two schools a mile apart, where two public schools a mile apart, even ignoring private schools, where one can be extremely wealthy and well situated and one can not be. I mean, even within schools, there's a high school very close to me um, that's called Menlo Atherton High School. And half of the school comes from Atherton, which is uh, the wealthiest zip code in the world. Uh, higher number of billionaires per capita than anywhere else in the world. Um, and its students reflect that. And half the school comes from East Palo Alto, which for a while was the murder capital of the US. Um, and yet they're in close enough geographic proximity that they literally go to the same high school, except at that high school, all the honors classes are taken by the Atherton kids, right? All the AP classes are taken by the Atherton kids. Everyone that, accelerates ahead in math, it's all the Atherton kids. And so it's not just like you go from state to state and you see that difference. It's literally within the same buildings.
Well, I think it's incredible. But China also have the similar things, but not too severe, as you have said. In our high school, we have different level of classes because it will um, distribute the students in different classes based on the score you when you enter in this high school. So they will give different level of education to different classes, and maybe the better classes will have better educational resources, and the students in the less advantaged classes will get access to the disadvantaged education resources.
Okay, now let's delve a little deeper into how education reflects the broader political and cultural values in your countries. Nate, we often hear that the US education system emphasizes individuality, critical thinking, and freedom of expression, just like the founding ideals of the country. Is that something that you've personally experienced, and how did that shape your worldview?
Yeah, 100%, especially with regards to critical thinking, which started off as kind of a, you know, again, like progressive education term 30, 40 years ago, but has become mainstream across the United States, and I think is one of the best parts of our educational system. Um, Freedom of expression is absolutely true, especially in comparison to, well, I would imagine China. Um, at the same time, some of that is called into question by the politicization that I was talking about in terms of what books can be read or what students can say. But still, those are the exception that prove the rule, that freedom of expression is fundamentally established in schools. The way that people can talk to each other, can talk to their teachers, can talk to, make public statements, all of that is 100% shaped by that. I think individuality, if I recall correctly, was the last thing you said, is an interesting one. I don't think, I think the American education system is certainly competitive. I don't know if I would say it's individualistic. I think that I would say the American education system is agnostic with respect to sort of individualism versus community success. But I certainly think with freedom of expression and critical thinking, those are absolutely core values.
Thank you. And on the other hand, education in China is said to be rooted in Confucian principles, emphasizing discipline and collective achievement. Do you agree with this assessment? And how does the education system reinforce these values?
Yeah, I think this assessment is largely accurate. The traditional values like discipline and collective achievement remain deeply rooted in our mindset. And while the modern reforms encourage individuality, they still serve a collectivist framework for us. Our classroom discipline, our group activities, and the school rituals all reinforce a shared identity, which is aligned with our education system. Yeah.
Great. Now let's move on to the bigger picture. Education in both the US and China plays a big role in how the next generation will approach the world's most pressing issues, such as climate change and technological advancements. And it is evident that these issues will have to require global collaboration because it holds stakes for everyone. So, how do you think your education systems have prepared you to tackle these challenges in a globalized future?
I think my answer to this is largely governed by the fact that I've spent my life going to school and living in the middle of Silicon Valley. And so I've been surrounded by these issues firsthand. I think that our education is forward looking almost to a fault. Um, Again, in terms of the pendulum swing, most of the United States, especially where I go to school, has moved away from like memorizing names and dates on history exams and things like that. And I think that our education system is very fundamentally governed by this idea of, I think, maybe not individualism, but certainly individual agency, and that everyone has the power to make a difference and everyone has the power to make change. And so I think that implicitly throughout our lives almost preconditions us to believe that we have the ability as individuals and as a community to find solutions to a lot of these issues and find ways to integrate and adapt to them.
What about you, Cherry?
Okay, I believe the Chinese education system has provided us with a very solid academic foundation and also has equipped us with the perseverance to tackle the complex problems as we have done in our schools when faced with global issues like the climate change. This kind of power can is very essential for any kind of collaboration. So while our system emphasized on the discipline, it also teaches us how to work within large groups toward a shared goal. So in the future, I hope to combine this resilience with a more open global perspective to find solutions alongside the partners from different parts of the world.
Okay, then finally, thinking about the future of US-China relations, do you think there should be more collaboration between the students of the two countries? And if so, what can we do right now as students?
I think the answer is in the abstract, yes, but I think that it's hard to nail down the specifics of what that would look like. I don't think we can ignore the sort of geopolitical reality that the United States and China are primarily adversarial. And I think part of the implication of that is that, like, you know, research partnerships, for example, are pretty difficult to set up, right? Collaboration on political or on economic research is pretty difficult to set up. And so I think that, and I'm not blaming this on China. I certainly think that there are plenty of areas like in green tech adoption and innovation where China is far outpacing the United States in terms of both sort of social responsibility and also just fundamentally like economic common sense. Um, I'm curious to the extent that students can make a difference, especially, pre-university students, high schoolers and middle schoolers. But I certainly think at the college level, there should be a lot more discourse and there should be a lot more interaction in terms of how we want to shape sort of global society.
So if we disregard the larger geopolitical issues, would you feel excited to collaborate on, say, like scientific research with students from China?
I would say yes, but I think that's a pretty big if.
Okay. Then, Cherry, what do you think about collaboration?
Yes, I agree with the geopolitical issues between our countries, but I think as a student, we can bridge our friendship by joining some exchange programs and organize more cross-cultural discussions like this podcast, or even just share our real campus lives on the social media. So maybe when we will realize that we have much more common than we thought before. And I think this kind of personal friendships are the strongest foundation for our future cooperation between the two countries.
Then finally, I'd like to ask both of you, what do you hope to see in the future of education in your country? Such as what are some strengths from the other system that you think you could learn from?
I mean, I think the pendulum has swung too far away in the United States from uh, I don't just want to say rote memorization, but actually really fundamentally understanding the truth of history and really diving into facts as they exist beyond just sort of methods of thinking and critical thinking. And I think that some sense of a return to that would be really valuable and really meaningful. Um, I also think that broadly speaking, well, I don't think American students need any more pressure, just like I don't think Chinese students need any more pressure, but I think that a reshaping of, some of the responsibility that already exists from this sort of individualistic, I'm doing this for myself, to the broader, I'm doing this for my family and I'm doing this with the awareness of all the people that have sacrificed so much on my behalf, which is true for the vast majority of American students. I think would be a sort of healthy and responsible shift in the way that we go about our engagement.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. What about China's system? Anything to learn from?
Yeah, okay. I think for China, our education system should put more emphasis on the students' all-around development instead of just focusing on our academic performance. Uh, I very admire the emphasis on the critical thinking and individuality in US because it can make us learn more inspiring. Since the students in China shouldn't have too many different opinions than our compared to our uh, other students or the teachers. So I think we should have the option to put forward other kind of opinion. Yes.
Thank you to both of you. This was such a wonderful discussion. Um, and thank you to all of you who were listening. We covered a variety of topics today, from stereotypes, pressure, equality to global collaboration. Yet we just scratched the surface of what's a very complex and ever-evolving topic. As always, we encourage you to share your thoughts, engage with us online, and stay tuned for the next episode of Converging Horizons podcast. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.